Thank you. Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. The draft framework for delivering the additional 450 gigalitres per year outlined in our Restoring Rivers Bill provided more funding towards finalising the Basin Plan, but the budget indicated this funding was not for publication. How much funding is required?
Senator, as you mentioned, the budget papers say that it is not for publication, and the reason for that is, there'll be the potential for competitive tendering, and you wouldn't normally publish the figures prior to going to a tender. So
Thank you. I
not
accept
for
that.
publication.
What provision will be made to support the river communities that will be impacted by water recovery?
Senator, we spoke about that a bit earlier this afternoon. So the framework describes a sustainable communities program. That's for community adjustment. The funding will go through states under federal financial agreements. So there's the proposal is for a specific standalone program focused on supporting communities that need support to adjust, and for that funding to be provided through states who are best placed to work with local communities, build on their existing regional stakeholder engagement networks, and also to build on existing funding that's going into those particular communities that need to be the focus.
So federal funding through the states?
Yes, so funding under FFAs, federal funding agreements.
Thank you. Minister, this seems to be a continuation of the undeclared war on farmers. I've been to Dirranbandi in southern Queensland, on the border community there, and the same applies to northern New South Wales, so Senator Pavey, I'm sure, will be concerned as well. Who gets the land after you drive farmers off? And a lot of farmers have been driven off in Dirranbandi and other places. But who is going to use this land once you get rid of the farmers, and for what purpose will they use it?
Senator, I don't accept the scenarios that you set out in your question, nor do I accept your characterisation of our posture towards Australian agricultural communities. Our view is that a sustainable basin, healthy working river, is essential to underwrite the future of food and fibre production in this country, to underwrite the future of regional towns that depend, as has been discussed earlier today, on adequate supplies of clean drinking water, and also to protect our environmental assets in the basin. And we think those three things are compatible with one another and, in fact, interdependent. So the approach that we're taking is working through a difficult and challenging reform. It's now looks like it will be a multi-decade reform. It's one that's been going on for many years. It requires cooperation between the states and the territories and the Commonwealth. It has been bipartisan. Regrettably, not very much progress was made in the decade that the coalition were in office. But in the 2 years we've been in government, we have set about looking at the progress that's been made so far, what more needs to be done, and putting in place the legislative arrangements, the financial arrangements and the implementation arrangements to implement the Basin Plan in full.
Thank you. Have you heard of the rewilding plan that's part of the United Nations Agenda 21 or 2030 as it is now? It was exposed in the United States. Similar concepts here.
You'll have to table the United Nations documentation,
okay.
Senator Roberts. I haven't seen that documentation.
Okay. What about hollowing out the bush? Because I've been to Moolameen in southern New South Wales, northern Victoria. What about compensation to supermarkets, small businesses in the areas who will all lose business with the water that's going to be taken, and with that lose the critical mass necessary to keep these towns going? Football teams dying, sporting clubs dying. What about the compensation for the people who are not on the land but who depend upon the people on the land?
Senator, over the course of today we've had a few discussions about socio-economic impacts, some of them in response to questions from yourself. I think you heard Ms Connor speak earlier about some of the research that's occurred already about the multiple drivers of change in Australian rural communities. You've also heard Ms O'Connell and Ms Connor speak about the approach to socioeconomic assessment in terms of any decisions that might be taken. And you have, thirdly, heard just now a description of the approach that's proposed in terms of working with the states and territories to provide support for communities. I'm not sure how further to respond to
part of the process.
Your questions, but I do think a lot of information has been provided over the course of the day about the way we're thinking about these challenges in implementing the plan in full. Something I believe continues to have bipartisan support, as was confirmed by Senators Davey and Ruston earlier.
With due respect, can I just ask one last question?
One last question.
What is the total cost estimate to complete the Basin Plan?
Senator, current public commitments to the Basin Plan are around $13 billion. That's over the life of the plan, over the last 12 years. There's around about just...
So that includes past money?
Past programs and existing, and including the ones from the 24-25 budget. There's around $3 billion publicly stated funding that remains against that $13 billion to be spent.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.